Rain tapped against the cobblestone streets like hurried fingers on a typewriter. Elliot Graves hunched beneath his worn brown coat, clutching a leather satchel to his side as the late autumn wind nipped at his neck. The city always seemed colder when it rained, not just the weather, but the buildings, the people, even time itself felt distant, withdrawn. He didn't usually take this route home. The storm had knocked out the main subway line, forcing him to cut through the older part of town, where the streets twisted like forgotten veins, and time hadn't updated its clocks in decades. He passed a boarded-up bakery, a shuttered pawn shop, and then paused. There, between two crooked brick buildings, sat a store he was certain hadn't been there yesterday. The sign above the narrow green door read, "Delmere and Sons, Antiquities and Oddities, Time is what you make it." Elliot blinked. The gold lettering shimmered in the rain. Curiosity tugged at him. He checked his phone, 2:37 p.m., battery at 9%, then pushed the door open. A chime rang overhead, not the sharp ding of a bell, but a low, resonant hum, like the last chime of a grandfather clock. Inside, the world felt hushed, not silent, but still. The kind of stillness that settles over an old library or an attic full of forgotten things. Dust floated in amber shafts of light, disturbed only by Elliot's cautious steps across the hardwood floor. Clocks filled the room. Grandfather clocks, mantel clocks, pocket watches, cuckoo clocks, even hourglasses perched on dark wooden shelves. Each ticked in their own rhythm, none in sync, yet somehow harmonized like instruments in a dissonant orchestra. A man emerged from behind a velvet curtain, elderly, rail-thin, dressed in a black waistcoat with a silver chain running from his pocket. His hair was the color of fog, and his eyes, they were glassy, almost reflective. "Looking for something you've already lost, or something you haven't found yet?" the man asked with a faint smile. Elliot gave a nervous laugh. "Honestly, just shelter from the rain." The old man nodded, stepping forward. "Then you were meant to find us. I am Mr. Delmere, and this," he spread his hands, "is my collection. Some of it mine by purchase, some by inheritance, and some, well, by fate." Elliot wandered. Further in, drawn to a small glass case at the back. Inside, nestled in red velvet, was a vintage pocket watch. It was brass, intricately engraved with swirling patterns that seemed to shift when the light struck them. "No price tag. This one," Elliot said, pointing. "It's beautiful," Mr. Delmere's smile faltered. "Not for sale, but it's in the case." "So it is? Perhaps it wanted to be seen." Delmere stepped beside him, his fingers hovering just above the glass. That watch belonged to a timekeeper. Not a collector, like me. A user. Dangerous thing if you don't understand it. Elliot raised an eyebrow. "A timekeeper?" "Someone who can change the rules, if only briefly. You'll understand soon enough." Without warning, Mr. Delmere opened the case, took the watch, and pressed it into Elliot's palm. "I thought you said it wasn't for sale." "I didn't say I wouldn't give it to you, but know this, every second borrowed is a debt, and some debts collect themselves." Before Elliot could protest, Mr. Delmere returned to the curtain and disappeared behind it. The watch felt heavier than it looked. Warm somehow, like it had been waiting to be held. Elliot opened it. The hands inside didn't move, though the ticking echoed softly from within. The interior lid had a small engraving. Tempus non donatur, tempus commutatur. Time is not given, time is exchanged. Rain still fell outside. The shop seemed unchanged, but somehow more distant, as if he'd stepped into a painting and hadn't noticed. "Thanks," Elliot called out, but there was no answer. He left the shop, tucking the watch into his coat. As the door swung shut behind him, he glanced back. The sign above the shop had faded. The windows were dark. The green door no longer bore the words Delmere and Sons, just a blank, splintered plank of wood. The antique shop was gone. Elliot didn't sleep that night. He laid in bed with the brass watch on his nightstand, its soft ticking louder than it had any right to be. It hadn't moved, no change in the hands, no sign of winding, but it ticked like a beating heart in the quiet dark. He'd half convinced himself the entire shop had been a hallucination. Maybe he'd fallen in the rain, hit his head, and imagined Mr. Delmere and his strange warnings. But the watch was real, and so was the engraving. He read it, again by the light of his desk lamp, tracing the Latin words with his thumb. Tempus non donatur, tempus commutatur. He opened the cover once more, holding it under the light. Nothing. Just the frozen hands and swirling engravings. It looked like a museum piece, inert and unassuming. But then, almost absent-mindedly, his thumb brushed a small indentation near the crown. Click. Time stopped. He didn't feel it happen, not at first. No flash of light, no dramatic pulse or tremor, just stillness. Utter, perfect stillness. The rain outside froze in mid-air, tiny droplets suspended like glass beads. The city hum vanished. The second hand of the wall clock in his room hung between two ticks. Even the flickering street lamp across the road paused in mid-flicker. Elliot stood up slowly. His movements felt normal. He could breathe, walk, blink, but the world around him was frozen like a paused film. He stepped to the window, touching the cold glass. Outside, a crow hovered motionless in mid-flight, wings spread wide. A man across. The street, mid-stride, leaned forward forever. Elliot's breath caught. Wonder and fear danced in his chest. "What in the hell?" he whispered. He held up the watch. Its hands now spun rapidly, whirring like a tiny machine gone mad. But everything else remained still. Then he saw it. Far down the empty street, half concealed in the shadow of a building, stood a figure, dark, tall, indistinct. Elliot blinked and rubbed his eyes. The figure didn't move. It couldn't. Time was still paused, but it hadn't been there before. The form was faint, more like a silhouette painted in smoke than a real person. It had no face, only a vague suggestion of one. Its limbs were elongated, just slightly wrong, as if proportions were optional. A shiver ran down Elliot's spine. He turned away, heart thudding. Click. The ticking resumed. The crow flapped past. The man across the street took another step. The hum of the city returned like the volume being turned back up on life. Elliot staggered back into his room, clutching the watch like a grenade. The hands had returned to their frozen position. Still. Quiet. Innocent. But something had changed. The next morning, Elliot awoke groggy and disoriented. He had barely slept, haunted by dreams of the shadow in the street. Every time he blinked, he imagined it closer, watching. He tried to forget it, tried to convince himself it had been a trick of light or his own anxiety. But that didn't explain the frozen rain, the silence, the impossible stillness. He brought the watch with him everywhere now. Part of him was terrified. Another part, addicted. He didn't use it again for 3 days. Then on a sunny afternoon, he saw it happen. A boy, no older than 10, chased a ball into the street just as a delivery truck rounded the corner. Fast, far too fast to stop in time. Without thinking, Elliot yanked the watch from his coat. Click. Silence. The truck froze in mid-screech, the boy mid-lunge. Elliot ran forward, scooped the boy into his arms and carried him back to the sidewalk. As soon as they were clear, click. Sound returned. The truck barreled through the spot where the boy had been, its driver completely unaware of what had just been avoided. The boy looked up at Elliot, confused.
How'd you... But Elliot was staring past the truck. The shadow was there again, not far this time, not across the street. It stood just beyond the curb, arms hanging at its sides, faceless head tilted in his direction.
It hadn't moved, couldn't. But Elliot could feel its presence like static in the air. He didn't wait. He walked the boy to the corner and told him to be careful next time, then turned and marched home. Once inside, he locked the door, shut every window, and placed the watch under a glass bowl in the middle of the kitchen table, as if that could contain it. It was only after he sat down that he realized something else. He had felt something during the freeze, just a flicker, a sensation, like someone breathing on the back of his neck. Elliot kept the lights on that night. Every creak of the floor, every shifting shadow made him jump. He didn't touch the watch again, but he couldn't stop staring
at it. The problem wasn't just that time could be paused, it was what came with it. And each time the world stood still, the shadow got closer.
Elliot lasted 6 days, 6 days without touching the watch. 6 days of growing tension, like a storm forming behind his eyes. The world didn't feel right anymore, not just because of the watch, but because now he wasn't right. Every second ticked louder, every moment felt too long, too fragile, and the shadow, it haunted the edges of his life. In his dreams, it stood at the foot of his bed. In reflections, it appeared behind him for a heartbeat. Once, while walking to the store, he saw a tall, dark figure in a window's reflection. But when he turned, the sidewalk was empty. He tried to convince himself it was paranoia, sleep deprivation, guilt even for meddling with time. But deep down, he knew the truth. The shadow wasn't a hallucination, it was real, and it was getting closer. It happened again on a Thursday. Elliot was walking home from the cafe where he sometimes worked. The sky had turned that murky orange-blue of early dusk, and the streets were thinning out as the wind picked up. A woman across the street screamed, a sharp, sudden sound that cut through the air. Elliot turned and saw 2 men in hooded jackets cornering her against a wall. One held a crowbar. The other was rifling through her purse. Without thinking, Elliot yanked the watch from his pocket. Click! Silence fell like a curtain. The woman's face was frozen mid-scream. The men were still as statues. Even the crows on the power lines above hung in mid-flap. Elliot crossed the street in seconds. He gently pulled the purse from the frozen man's hands, tucked it under the woman's arm, and turned the crowbar so it dropped to the ground. He positioned the men so they looked like they were holding hands and about to dance, a small, stupid rebellion against their threat. But then he saw it, the shadow, not across the street, not down the block. It was 10 feet away, standing between 2 parked cars just behind the taller man, closer than ever. Elliot's stomach lurched. The figure didn't move, couldn't. But its presence was suffocating, like walking into a room and knowing something's wrong before you can name it. The closer it got, the more defined it became. This time. Elliot could make out faint ridges where a face should be. Hollow eyes, an impression of ribs beneath a torn black cloak. Its hands, They were long and skeletal, reaching toward something invisible, toward him. He backed away, heart pounding. Click. Time
surged back.
The woman screamed anew, clutching her purse. The men jumped, confused, then turned and ran, one of them stumbling over the crowbar. The woman blinked, looked down at the purse in her arms, then around in stunned confusion. Elliot didn't wait to explain. He sprinted down the street and didn't stop until he was home. He collapsed onto the floor of his apartment, gasping. His hands shook as he stared at the watch. It sat on the coffee table, still and quiet. But he could feel it now.
Like heat, like it was watching him. Whatever that thing was, it moved when he used the watch.
It existed in the frozen world, and each time he paused time, it crept closer. He wasn't imagining it. There was a pattern, a rule. Every use brought the shadow nearer. He had to know more. He had to understand what he was dealing with, what he'd inherited. That night, he examined the watch more closely than ever before. After an hour of inspection, he noticed a hairline seam inside the lid, a compartment. With trembling fingers, he used a jeweler's knife to pry it open. Inside was a folded slip of yellowed paper and a brittle page torn from a book. One was handwritten, the other typed. The handwritten note was brief. If you're reading this, you've already used it. The shadow is real. Don't think you're the first. You won't be the last. The more time you steal, the faster it comes. There's no escaping it, but there might be a way to send it back. Find the others. Don't let it touch you. It was signed with only an initial, A. The other page was a list of names and dates. 3 of them were crossed out with thick, panicked lines. The rest were underlined with red ink. Beside one of the names was a small address, Amara Lynn, 412 Eastworth Street. Apt, 7 Selliot exhaled slowly. He wasn't alone. Someone else had worn the watch. Others had seen the shadow. Maybe someone knew how to stop it. He had to find Amara Lynn before the shadow found him. Elliot found Eastworth Street on the edge of the old industrial district, where the city's skin peeled back to reveal crumbling warehouses and rust-bitten scaffolding. Apartment 7C sat near the top of a soot-colored brick building whose elevator hadn't worked in years. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time. Each step felt heavier the closer he got, not from exhaustion, but dread. Something about the watch throbbed in his pocket, like a second heartbeat. The memory of the shadow's hollow face haunted the back of his eyes. He hadn't used the watch in 3 days, and yet he felt it breathing down his neck at the top. Floor? He found a door with peeling paint and a brass number 7C screwed on crookedly. He knocked. Nothing. Then, just as he was about to try again, the door creaked open, held by a chain lock. A woman's voice came from within. "You shouldn't be here." Are you Amara Lynn?" Pause. "What do you want?" "I have the watch, the one that freezes time." The chain rattled. Silence. Then, click. The chain slid off and the door opened. Amara Lynn was in her 40s, tall and wiry with sharp eyes that seemed older than her face. Her hair was streaked with grey, tied back in a bun, and she wore a long cardigan that hung like armour. She didn't ask how he'd found her. She simply stepped aside and said, "Come in." Elliot followed her into a narrow apartment stacked with books, scattered papers and clocks, far more than he had in his own place. None of them ticked. All were stopped at different times. The room was still as a photograph. She gestured to a chair by the window. "Sit." He did. She remained standing, arms crossed. "You've seen it?" she asked. "The shadow?" "Yeah." "How close?" Last time, maybe 10 feet. She sucked in a breath. Then you don't have long. Elliot pulled out the folded list and handed it to her. I found this inside the watch. Your name was the only one not crossed out. She glanced at the list, grimaced, and set it aside. The rest are dead. From the shadow? Some. One took her own life. One tried to smash the watch with a sledgehammer. It stopped his heart instead. Elliot swallowed. What is it? The shadow? Amara looked at the nearest stopped clock. Her voice softened. It's a debt collector. That's the best I can
Explain it. Every time you pause time, you're stealing seconds, borrowing life from the universe, but it doesn't come free. She crossed the room and pulled a thick, leather-bound journal from a drawer.
The spine was cracked, the cover scorched at one corner. She handed it to him. This belonged to one of the first known timekeepers. It's more than 100 years old. Elliot opened it carefully. The pages were filled with dense, slanted handwriting, diagrams of the watch, sketches of the shadow, some childlike in their fear, others unsettlingly precise, notes circled in red ink, read like warnings. It only moves when time stops. Never look it in the eyes. It learns, it adapts. Every pause shortens the distance. There may be a reset, but it comes at a cost. He flipped through sketches of others who'd worn the watch, each entry ending in tragedy or disappearance. There's no way to destroy it? Elliot asked. No, Amara said. The watch survives. It always does, like it wants to be passed along, like it knows. He looked up. You used it too? Twice. That was enough. It got close. I saw its face. Or what it wanted me to think was a face. She sat across from him, her voice dropping to a whisper. The worst part is it doesn't just move, it remembers. The closer it gets, the more it reaches into your world. Dreams, mirrors, reflections, and if you let it touch you, she trailed off. What happens if it touches you? Her eyes locked with his. You disappear. Not just from life, from time. Like you were never born. A silence settled between them, thick and uneasy. Then Elliot asked, What's this about a reset? The journal mentioned it. Amara hesitated. There's one passage, page 83. He flipped there. The entry was barely legible, written in a shaking hand. The shadow nearly reached me. I could feel its fingers graze my breath, but I found something. If enough stolen time is returned, if the balance is repaid, it resets. You go back. Everything rewinds. But you lose something, a part of yourself, maybe all of it. Beneath the passage was a diagram of the watch, opened in a different configuration, a twist in the casing Elliot hadn't noticed. A thin arrow pointed to a hidden catch beneath the crown. Elliot looked up. So if I give the time back, will you
Might survive, Amara said. Or you might vanish with it. No one's done it before, not successfully. He stared at the journal, at the desperate handwriting, at the heavy truth it carried. What would you do? He asked. She gave him a long look. I already made my choice. I locked the watch in a box and buried it in my closet. You opened it. That makes it yours now. Elliot nodded slowly. He knew
what he had to do. That night, back in his apartment, he sat with the journal open on one side and the watch in his hand. He turned it, found the hidden catch, and gently pried it open. Inside was a thin, spinning wheel etched with runes. The counter. It read 34 pauses. He'd used the watch 34 times, and the shadow was only feet away, if there was ever a chance. To reverse this, to send it back, it would require one more pause, maybe the last. The rain tapped gently on the window pane as Elliot stared at the journal. The thin spinning wheel inside the watch, etched with those strange runes, now sat still, its markings glinting in the lamplight. 34 pauses. 34 moments, stolen from the flow of time. 34 steps that had brought the shadow closer. He couldn't shake the feeling that the number wasn't just a counter, it was a warning, a countdown. He spent the next day poring over the journal. If there was any hope of surviving, of resetting the balance, he needed to know what had happened to the others. Those who'd worn the watch, those who hadn't made it. Each entry was a fragment of a larger tragic mosaic. No 7 Josephine Marquet, a nurse during a tuberculosis outbreak in southern France. She used the watch to freeze time and administer medicine when wards were overwhelmed. After 12 uses, she reported seeing a dark man in the corners of her vision. At 21 uses, she vanished in the middle of a hospital shift. Her patients claimed she walked into an empty hallway and never came back. One wrote, "She turned to speak, then stopped, like a candle going out." 1939, Wilhelm Drossel, a German resistance fighter. He stole the watch from a Nazi officer who had used it to escape assassinations. Wilhelm used it to smuggle people out of Berlin, pausing time to cross streets unnoticed. At 30 uses, he attempted a reset. His journal ended mid-sentence. The watch was later found in a train station locker, wrapped in a blood-stained scarf. 64, Lenora Bates, an American jazz pianist who used the watch to extend her performances, freezing time to keep her hands from tiring. Her writings were more poetic than fearful, until the final pages where she described the shadow dancing behind her audience. She stopped using the watch at 28 pauses and locked it in a steel vault. Her house burned down a month later. The watch survived. 2. Arvind Kulkarni, an Indian physicist who believed the watch was a quantum artifact. He recorded its behavior obsessively, developing theories on entropy compensation and temporal debt. He designed a machine to equalize time flow during pauses. According to a surviving student, the machine worked for 10 seconds before imploding. Arvind was never found. The watch reappeared in a pawn shop in Delhi. Elliot paused and rubbed his eyes. Each story echoed the same pattern: curiosity, use, encounters, fear, disappearance. He flipped back to the beginning and circled a passage from Wilhelm Drossel's notes. The more noble the reason for its use, the slower the figure approaches. But the clock never forgets, the debt is always tallied. That line stuck with him. Noble use. Elliot thought of the little boy in the street, the woman being mugged. He hadn't used the watch for selfish gain, not like some of the others. But it didn't matter. Even altruistic theft of time was still theft, and the figure was still coming. He reached the end of the journal where Amara had added her own entry in more recent ink. To the next one. If you're reading this, you're already too deep. But maybe you're smarter, maybe braver. If you can find a way to reverse it, if there really is a reset, I hope you come back to write it down. I'll leave the light on. It was signed in looping cursive. A.L. Elliot closed the book and leaned back. A thought circled in his mind like a hawk above a dying field. What if the shadow wasn't just a collector, but a reminder, a manifestation of every second stolen, every moment borrowed against the universe's rhythm, And what if, just maybe, it could be sent back? That night, Elliot began writing his own entry in the journal, using the blank pages at the back. My name is Elliot Vance. I inherited the watch
1 month ago from a man I never knew. I've used it 34 times. I've seen the shadow. It's within arm's reach now. If I vanish, let this be proof that I existed. And if I don't, if I succeed in resetting it, you'll know, because this journal will still be here. There.
Has to be a way to break the pattern. I don't believe we're all doomed. If you're reading this, don't give up. The watch may be cursed, but maybe curses can be rewritten. He signed his name, dated the page, and closed the book with a soft thud. Outside, the wind whispered through the city's alleys. Inside, the watch ticked once, just once, though he hadn't touched it. Elliot had run out of time. The shadow was no longer a lurking presence behind mirrors or glimpsed in the periphery. It now haunted his apartment in broad view, still frozen whenever he looked directly at it, but moving closer each time he blinked or turned away. He woke to find it standing beside his bed. He nearly screamed, but managed to stay still. Breath shallow, eyes wide, its face had begun to form, or at least the impression of a face. Sunken, symmetrical pits where eyes should be, a mouth that looked less like lips and more like a tear in fabric. Its hands hung at its sides, long enough to drag along the floor. It didn't breathe, it didn't need to, but he could feel it watching him. Even when it couldn't move, Elliot had to act now. That morning, he returned to Amara Lynn's apartment with the journal in hand. She opened the door before he knocked, as if she'd been waiting. I'm going to try the reset, Elliot said. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed slightly. You're sure? I don't think I have a choice. Amara stepped back and let him in. She cleared space at her work table and helped him set up everything they might need. The journal, a magnifying glass, tools for precision, tea neither of them drank. You need to return the time, she said. As much as you can, not just freeze and unfreeze it. Reinvest it somehow, Elliot nodded. I've got an idea. He'd spent the night planning it. If using the watch to take time stole seconds from the world, then perhaps giving time, real time, could shift the balance. No shortcuts? No freezes? He would perform an unbroken act of service. One that demanded real effort, patience, and time. The next morning, Elliot found the city's oldest assisted living home and signed up as a volunteer. No pay, no shortcuts. He spent hours helping residents with small, ordinary things, reading books aloud, fixing broken radios, repairing a collapsed bookshelf in the library, listening to stories that rambled and looped. When a nurse asked how long he'd be volunteering, he said, until it matters. For 7 straight days he didn't touch the watch, the shadow remained, still, watching, inches away. But something strange began to happen. The spinning wheel in the watch, once marked with 34 pauses, ticked backward, slowly. By the end of the first day, 33.9. By the third day, 32.4. By the 6th, 30. Elliot dared not speak of it to Amara, fearing it might jinx the process. But on the 7th day, when he returned home, the shadow was farther away, across the room, arms lowered, not gone, but retreating. That night, Elliot lit a candle, sat at his desk, and opened the watch. The wheel ticked softly in reverse. 29.7. He turned to the final pages of the journal and began to write. I think I understand now. The watch doesn't just punish the thief of time, it tests the one who carries it. Every pause is a temptation, But it's the moments we endure without shortcuts that seem to weaken the shadow. I don't know how many seconds I need to return, but I'll keep giving until it stops breathing down my neck." He paused. "If this works, if I disappear, then maybe that's the price. But maybe someone else will find the watch and make a better choice from the start." He set down the pen, lifted the watch, and pressed the hidden catch beneath the crown, the one from page 83. The inner dial clicked open, revealing the return mechanism, a copper loop meant for a final, irreversible turn. The reset. He placed his thumb on the wheel and turned. The sensation was instant and terrifying. Not pain, absence. The room dissolved. The candlelight stuttered, then snuffed out. Sound vanished. Not just quiet, but the total lack of it. As if he'd fallen outside the concept of time entirely. He stood alone in a space of pure white, no floor, no ceiling, only the sensation of standing. The watch floated before him, glowing softly, and behind it, the shadow. Unmoving. Elliot's body trembled, not from fear this time, but understanding. It had never truly wanted to take him. It was waiting for a choice. To return what had been stolen. To balance the scale. He stepped forward and placed the watch on the ground between them. "I'm done," he said softly. "You can take the time back." The shadow reached forward, its fingertips grazing the watch, and vanished. Elliot gasped, his eyes shot open. He was lying on his back, on a bench in a city park. Sunlight filtered through the trees, the watch sat in his hand, closed, cool to the touch, still, and the dial. Pauses, not a single use, a clean slate. He turned the watch over. Inside the lid, the initials engraved there were no longer MV for Michael Vance. They were EV, his name, Elliot Vance. He returned to Amara's apartment that evening, but when he knocked, a stranger opened the door. "No one named Amara lives
"Here," the woman said. "At least not in the last 20 years. There were no clocks on the walls, no journals, nothing." Elliot stood in the hall a long time after the door shut, watching the dust dance in the golden hallway light. Time was moving again. Naturally. He didn't know what had changed, whether he'd gone back or forward, whether
the world had reset or simply shed its skin like a snake. All he knew was this: he still had the watch. It still worked, and the shadow was gone for now. For the first time in weeks, Elliot slept soundly. The dreams that once clawed at his subconscious, the ones filled with the shadow's blank face and long-reaching hands, were gone. No cold fingers brushing his cheek, no motionless figure crouched in corners when he woke. Yet something inside him remained unquiet. A subtle weight, a thread of doubt. He stared at the watch on his desk each morning, watching the second hand move naturally again. Each tick sounded almost too perfect, too obedient. Like it was pretending. He began noticing things. Small things at the corner. Cafe, the barista paused mid-sentence during a morning greeting, just for a blink, then resumed without blinking. A newspaper headline changed between glances. The corner of a billboard flickered for a second, like a glitch in a film reel. Once, in a passing window reflection, Elliot saw himself looking back. Only, the reflection didn't match his movements. Was it paranoia or something deeper? He started journaling his observations, continuing in the same notebook he had used during the reset. At first, it was just small notes. Mirror lagged again, only for a second. Bird froze mid-flight. Nobody else noticed. Time stuttered at 3:14 p.m. today. Felt like déjà vu, but heavier. Then one evening, as he wrote in the notebook, the pen slipped from his hand and rolled under the dresser. He knelt to retrieve it and found something wedged in the shadows, a folded piece of yellowed paper. He hadn't put it there. Hands trembling, he unfolded it. It was a torn page from the Timekeeper's journal, one he'd never seen before. Read, reset, successful, but not total. The watch remembers, always. The figure recedes, but its echo remains. A second shadow. A memory that hunts in silence. Below the handwriting was a single inked symbol, a black ring broken at the bottom. The same symbol etched inside the watch's hinge. Elliot sat still for a long time. The shadow hadn't left. It had become something else. That night, he dreamed again. Not of the old shadow, not the looming figure that followed his pauses. This was different. He stood in a white hallway, walls stretching endlessly in both directions, ticking sounds echoing in the distance. At his feet lay dozens of watches, some cracked, others still ticking. He stepped over them carefully, drawn to a distant light. When he reached it, he found a massive wall of mirrors, but they didn't reflect him. They reflected versions of him. Each slightly different, older, younger, broken, silent. Some stared straight at him. Some mouthed words he couldn't hear. One stood out. It didn't move at all. Its eyes were completely black. It raised a finger and pointed. Behind him, Elliot turned and woke up. The next morning, Elliot made a decision. He packed the watch back. Into the velvet box it came in, wrapped it in cloth, and locked it in a small safe at the bottom of his closet. He placed the Timekeeper's journal beside it. He didn't destroy them. He couldn't, but he could wait, live, observe, maybe even understand. Not everything had to be solved today. Not everything was meant to be. Some things existed to remind you what it cost to take the easy way, to cheat time, to outrun consequence. In the days that followed, he returned to the assisted living center, not to return time now, but simply to spend it. Genuinely. He rebuilt a broken chessboard with an old resident named Clara, who claimed she once beat Bobby Fischer. He planted flowers in the courtyard with a man who hadn't touched soil in 40 years. He read to a woman whose eyesight was nearly gone, but whose memory outshone Elliot's by miles. In those quiet moments, Elliot realized something. The watch
hadn't been a curse, it had been a test he almost failed. But he'd learned the one truth every timekeeper seemed to miss. Time isn't something to control.
It's something to be shared. Still sometimes, just sometimes, when the room goes too quiet or the second hand hesitates mid-tick, Elliot listens harder. He waits. He watches. Because in the corner of his eye, beyond where certainty ends and memory begins, he swears there's something watching back. The passage of days became gentle, steady. Elliot found peace in the rhythm of normalcy, waking with the sun, taking long walks through the park, sharing tea with old souls who measured life in stories rather than seconds. But even in peace, the echo lingered. Not fear, not quite, something subtler, like a song he'd once heard in a dream but could never quite recall, a haunting melody threading itself through time. It began with the clock tower. Every afternoon at precisely 3 o'clock, the city's old mechanical tower rang out across the rooftops with a hollow chime. It had done so for 100 years, Elliot was told. But one Tuesday, while passing beneath it, he noticed the time read 3:02, yet the bell hadn't rung. He waited. 10 seconds. 20. Then suddenly, dong, one chime. Late. Elliot looked around. No one else seemed to notice. But he did. Back at home, the feeling grew stronger. He began hearing faint whispers of ticking behind walls, even when no clocks were present. Mirrors occasionally clouded at their edges when he passed by, clearing the moment he stopped to look. And the watch, even untouched in its locked safe, called to him. Not loudly, just enough. One night, he couldn't sleep. He opened the closet, crouched down, and laid his hand on the safe. The metal felt warm. The moment he touched the dial, a soft click echoed from within. He didn't open it. Instead, he stepped back, breath held. Then the strangest thing happened. His bookshelf trembled, just slightly. A single book fell to the floor, a thick, leather-bound tome he didn't remember owning. The cover was blank, its pages empty, save for a single message on the first page: "The time is never lost, only redistributed." Over the next few days, Elliot became obsessed with finding meaning behind the phrase. He revisited Amara's apartment again. A new family lived there. No trace of her, not even in public records. He searched university archives for references to Michael Vance, the original owner of the watch. Nothing. Not a birth certificate, obituary, or mention. It was as if time had scrubbed them, or absorbed them. Elliot wondered if this was the final stage of being a timekeeper. Not death, not madness, but erasure. A return to time's source. He began writing letters, notes addressed to no one in particular, leaving them in library books, park benches, and between old journals at antique stores. He marked each with a drawing of the broken ring, hoping, perhaps, another like him might find them. If you have the watch, I hope you're still ahead of it. If you've seen the shadow, you're already part of the story. Don't try to own time. Let it move through you. Then came the boy. It was a cloudy afternoon when Elliot saw him, maybe 10 years old, standing on the edge of the sidewalk, staring at traffic. He wasn't lost, just still. Like a statue, Elliot crossed the street toward him. "Hey there," he said softly. "You okay?" The boy turned his head slowly, his eyes, green sharp, locked with Elliot's. In his hand was a small silver watch, no bigger than a coin. Familiar. Very familiar. Elliot's mouth went dry. "Where did you get that?" The boy tilted his head. "A man gave it to me. He said
I'd need it." What was his name? I don't remember. He was nice. He said I reminded him of someone. Elliot knelt. "That watch. It's dangerous?" "I know," the boy said. He looked down at it. "It only works when I really need it." I paused time once, when a dog was about to bite my sister. But then I saw something, a man in the air, like he was walking toward me. Elliot's blood turned to ice. "But I gave the time back," the boy added. "I sat with my sister for hours after that. She didn't even notice." But the man didn't. "Come back." Elliot stood slowly. "What's your name?" The boy smiled. "Eli." His heart stopped. That was his own childhood nickname, a name only his late mother used. But before he could ask anything else, the boy turned and crossed the street. Elliot watched him disappear into the mist. That night, he opened the safe. The watch was still there. Still ticking, but now the dial read. Pause. Elliot hadn't touched it, but someone had. He stared at it for a long time, then reached into the drawer beside him and pulled out a fresh notebook. He wrote on the first page, "To whoever holds the watch next, this story is not a warning. It's a memory, one that time tries to erase but never quite succeeds.
You may think you control it. You don't. But if you learn to respect it, you might survive. And if you give more than you take, you might even be remembered. He placed the notebook in the box with the watch, and this time, when he closed the lid, it clicked itself shut. Elliot no longer feared the watch. He respected it more deeply than ever, but the dread had passed. In its place was something more powerful, more unsettling: recognition. The boy, Eli, the journal entries that wrote themselves, the fragments of memory that arrived out of order. He was beginning to see the shape of it now. Time wasn't a line, it was a loop, and somehow, somewhere, he had been walking its edge all along. The first true break came on a Sunday morning. He was rereading one of his own old letters, one he'd tucked inside a volume of poetry, at a second-hand bookstore, when he noticed the handwriting wasn't his. Not quite similar strokes, a familiar rhythm, but older, more refined, and signed E.V. not Elliot Vance. Not exactly. The signature matched the engraving inside the watch's lid, the one that replaced Michael Vance's initials after the reset. It wasn't from the past, it was from the future. His future. He wasn't the end of the story, he was a middle. That night, Elliot returned to the park where he'd seen the boy. He waited for hours, watching the street lamps hum and flicker. No sign of Eli. But just after midnight, something shifted. Time bent, the air around him thickened, and for a second the world slowed, not fully frozen, but dragging like a record at the wrong speed. And out of that haze stepped a man. Older. Grace. At the temples, eyes that had seen too many pauses. He wore a faded coat, a notebook bulged from the pocket, and around his neck, glinting softly under the moonlight, hung the same silver watch. Elliot's heart stopped. The man looked at him and smiled, weary and knowing. "Hello, Elliot." The voice was his own. They sat on the same park bench. No words, at first. Just the mutual understanding that some conversations only happen once, even if they occur across lifetimes. "You gave it to him," Elliot finally said. "The boy?" "Yes," the older Elliot said. "I always do." "Is it always the same child?" "No. But they all become someone like us." He handed over a worn page from the journal, one Elliot had never written. "Each loop closes a little."
"Differently, but it always closes, and each time I remember a little more. You remember me?"
Elliot asked. "I am you," the older man replied. Then he added, gently, "You'll forget some of this. You have to, or it won't work." Elliot frowned. "What won't?" "The loop, the lesson. If you know too much, you try to change."
If you try to change it, it breaks, and if it breaks..." He let the words trail off. They both knew what would come instead. The shadow, the devourer. Before the old man rose to leave, he reached into his coat and handed Elliot a small brass
"Key for the final chapter," he said. "What does it open?" "Something you'll need when the loop begins again." Then he disappeared, literally vanished like mist pulling back from a window, and time resumed. A dog barked in the distance, a bicycle rolled past. The breeze returned. Elliot looked at the key in his hand. On the handle was etched a single word: remember, back, home. Elliot searched every drawer, shelf and closet until he found it. A small locked box he hadn't remembered packing when he moved in. He turned the key. Inside was a fresh, blank watch, identical in design, but untouched. Resting beside it was a photograph, aged and curling at the edges. A young woman, laughing, holding the hand of a child. On the back, in his own handwriting, "Let the next life be slower, let it be."
Full of time given, not borrowed. Let it be real. He didn't remember taking the photo.
Not yet, but he would. That night, he stood at his window and stared at the stars. The loop would close. He would begin again. He would forget just enough. He would leave the watch somewhere. Someone could find it. And that someone, perhaps a young boy or a lonely man in a dusty shop, would feel the tug of its pull, the temptation, the curse, the gift, but maybe, just maybe, they'd also find the journal or one of his letters.
Or a note scribbled in the margin of time, and they'd learn a little faster than he did. Time wasn't a straight road. It was a song, a refrain echoing backward and forward, and in its chorus, Eliot had found something close to peace. He whispered to the night, to the echo, to himself. I remember.
The boy's fingers hesitated over the velvet box. Dust clung to its edges. The latch clicked softly as he flipped it open. Inside, the silver watch glinted faintly in the slanting afternoon light. Smooth, intricate. Not modern, but timeless. The second hand ticked, as if it had never stopped. His name was Theo, 12 years old, and curious in the way children always are about forbidden things. He'd found the box at a flea market tucked under a table of old postcards and rusted tin toys. The vendor had said nothing when Theo picked it up, just nodded, slow and tired, as though watching the tide go out for the last time. Theo turned the watch over. An inscription gleamed inside the lid. Let the next life be slower. He didn't wear it at first. He kept it hidden beneath his bed wrapped in a scarf. But the tick never stopped, and over time it got louder, until one day, after his mother stormed out of the house, after his father locked himself in the study, after the silence fell heavy, Theo snapped. He clasped the watch on his wrist and paused time. The world stopped. Mid-argument, his parents' mouths hung open in frozen frustration. The kettle on the stove was caught mid-whistle. Outside, a bird hovered mid-air, wings frozen in flight. Theo wandered through the stillness, through the soft, golden light of the paused world. For the first time in ages, he felt calm. He stood in the middle of the street, arms out, pretending he could fly. He sat in a park, watching leaves hang motionless in mid-fall. He was free, but only for so long. Because when he turned to head home, he saw it. Far away. Standing beneath a street lamp. Completely still, yet somehow watching. A figure, wrapped in shadow. Face blank. Not moving, not yet. Theo unpaused. The world gasped awake. The figure vanished. He didn't tell anyone, but he used the watch again and again. Each time the shadow came closer. Sometimes it was behind a tree, sometimes reflected in a window. Once he saw it standing on the stairs inside his own house during a pause. Always still. Always silent. Always closer. One night, panicked and sleepless, Theo opened the watch's inner hinge. Beneath the face, a folded note was tucked, faded, but legible. A letter from someone named Eliot. If you're reading this, you've already paused time. You've seen it, the figure, the echo. It always comes, but there's a way to keep it at bay. You must give more than you take. Spend time with others, share moments, help strangers. Heal what's broken. The watch responds not to fear, but to purpose. If you hoard time, it hunts you. If you share it, it listens. Good luck, watchbearer. Theo didn't understand everything, but the message stuck. He stopped using the watch just for himself. He paused time to help a friend pass a test by tutoring him for hours in a still classroom. He helped his mum clean the house when she was too exhausted to move, leaving the kitchen spotless during a pause with a note. "I just wanted to help." He even visited an old man at the edge of town, Mr. Voss, who used to be a clockmaker but hadn't spoken in months. Theo sat with him, told him stories during a pause. Then one day, the man whispered, "Thank you." The figure still appeared, but it stopped moving. It became a fixed silhouette in the distance, no longer hunting, just witnessing, as if waiting. Years passed. Theo grew older, and the watch stayed with him. Quiet, trusted, a tool, not a crutch. He recorded everything. Pauses used, moments saved, lives touched. He began writing letters of his own, leaving them behind, folded inside books, tucked into hollowed-out clocks, dropped in public libraries, each signed TV Watchbearer. And one day, when he was old and tired and full of memories, Theo placed the watch back in its box, wrapped it in a scarf, and left it on a bench in a park. A quiet spot, the kind of place someone might stop and notice. A young girl walked by, she paused, saw the box, picked it up, and the loop began again.